You are welcome to the Voyage. My guest today is Isaiah Davis. At 21 years old, Isaiah was addicted to fentanyl. At a point, he was ready to give up. He believed that life is better without him. He was ready to give up to the addiction that has come to imprison him. But at that point, something happened. A complete change, a complete turnaround. You need to stay and watch through the end of Isaiah's story to know what actually delivered and transformed Isaiah into a man that is now living life full of joy, abundance. He is married now and has fully regained his sense of worth, his sense of mission. And so this is going to be an exciting and also a very powerful and transformative session. Isaiah, you are welcome to the set of The Voyage. I love to hear about people's background, their growing up, their family dynamics, the environment that shape who they are, because that really will make a big difference for people to understand who you are and to be able to connect to your journey.
Okay.
Can you describe some of your earliest memory of growing up when you were, say, 5, 6, 7, as much as you can remember? What was that kind of environment growing up, your family dynamics? What does it look like?
Yeah, no, I'd love to dive into that. Thank you again for having me, DJ.
Sure.
I'm really honored. Yeah, I was very blessed, honestly. I mean, that's just the first word I feel like that comes to mind. No family's perfect, no dynamic's perfect, yeah. But my mom and my dad, they never got married. So I never went through like the, I guess you could say, trauma that some kids go through of like divorce.
Okay.
Because my parents were just never together. It was always, spending time with both, but they both loved me well. They both come from big families, big loving families. And so I stayed with my mom mostly. My mom's one of 7. Okay. Other than one of her siblings, all the others have at least 3 kids or more. So tons of cousins. So when you talk earliest memories, I just remember like family get-togethers, tons of kids, tons of games, tons of love. Both my grandparents are, Bible-believing Christians. Okay. They love the Lord, and they raised all their children like that, and their children have raised all their children like that. So yeah, just lots of love in my childhood. And so, things weren't perfect, ideally, and the way that God desires family is, the mom and dad are together. But, my mom met my stepdad when I was like 6 or 7.
Okay.
And so he came into our life. He had 2 daughters. And so it was me and my sister, Olivia, and then his 2 daughters. So now there's 4 of us. And then they had a kid. So now there's 5 of us. And then my dad got remarried and he's got 3. So I have lots of siblings.
Wow, that's a large family. That's interesting. So Isaiah, what were some of your earliest memory that you remember now and it still brings smiles to your face?
I would say sports is probably a big one. I got into sports when I was like 4 or 5. Made a lot of friends that way, playing soccer, basketball, flag football, baseball. And so a lot of my earliest memories, I would say I would attribute to just learning how to play sports, getting better at it, team bonding, and just growing through that. Yeah, I would say sports.
Wow. So that means that at that time you have the desire to play professional, either to become, the next star in basketball or soccer.
Oh yeah, my first dream was a professional soccer player. That's what I set my mind on. I remember watching the World Cup when I was maybe like 10 or 11, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be a professional soccer player.
That's interesting. So where did that dream end?
Well, so when I got into junior high, I started doing track and field.
Okay.
And I ended up being pretty good at it. I originally wanted to go to college and play soccer because obviously if I want to be a professional soccer player, I gotta, make it from high school into college. And I loved soccer. I still love soccer all the way through my high school. But in high school, as I was doing track and field, I was showing a lot of promise of, being pretty good. I was getting recruited by some colleges. So I ended up going down that path and doing track and field. So I guess that's probably where the dream maybe died is when I, also realized that I probably was never going to be good enough. I wasn't even the best person on my high school team. So, that kind of kills that dream too.
It's all right. It is interesting that when you look at the stats, maybe 1 out of 1,000 kids eventually get into professional basketball or soccer. But then you see parents still pushing their kids, into sports and all of that. Well, it's all good. So let's dive in a little deeper now. At 14 years old, what were your memories of life at that point in time? Because I know that at that age, kids basically are beginning to form a sense of identity, a sense of who they want to be in life, having a voice of their own. So for you, what were some of those things that begins to shape you and who you want to be?
That's a good question. When I was 14, that's kind of when I would say my testimony started kicking off, when things kind of started maybe not looking so good for my future. And a lot of it was wrapped into identity and who I identified myself to be. A lot of my identity was wrapped up in sports. A lot of my emotional stability was kind of dependent on how well I was maybe doing in the sport that I was playing in that season. I also put a lot of identity into like my friends and who my friends were and just like being a social person. I would say those two things are not sustainable to be an identity that will last. And because, what man creates, man can destroy, but what God creates, no one can destroy.
Yeah.
And although I grew up going to church and, we would pray before meals. My mom was big on us, reading the Bible, whether we did or not. She wanted us to. But my identity never really came from any of those things. I really just didn't care, as sad as it is to say. It just wasn't, it wasn't the first thing on my mind, I wanted to be a good athlete, a good student. And yeah, I would say when I was 14 years old, those were the main things I was focused on. And, probably right when I was about to turn 15 or getting closer to 15 is when I started, kind of hanging out with the wrong people and doing some of the wrong things, starting to drink and smoke. And then my identity got wrapped up into that lifestyle.
I'd say.
I like how that makes me feel. And, you feel like you're cool because you're hanging out with 18-year-olds as a 15-year-old, smoking and drinking, which at the end of the day, we're all still kids, But yeah, I would say that's kind of some of the memories that I have at 14.
So you hit a very important point right there, that even though you grew up in a Christian home, so to say, your parents pray with you, they read the Bible, and I guess you also attend several youth camp and things like that, but your identity was shaped around sport, and your heart begins to deviate into drugs and drinking and things like that. I'm curious, looking back now, what do you think was missing in that your upbringing in terms of your exposure to the Bible, prayer, church activities, but yet your heart was not connected to all of those practices?
I've thought about it a lot, because I'm getting ready to have my own kid here soon, and so it's like, okay, what do I need to do? What kind of things do I need to implement? Where did it go wrong with me? And, and my mom's even asked me that too. And I've, told her many times, like, I don't look back and think that you did anything wrong necessarily. She always would pray for me. Sure, we would get into our bickering matches and our fights and stuff like that. But even at the times where I felt like I couldn't stand her, I still would always go back to her. I still would lean on her. I think the biggest thing, just looking back to my mindset at that point, was that I didn't really understand that I was a sinner in need of a savior. I knew that all sinned, right? We all needed Jesus. But it wasn't like personal for me, it was just kind of like this broad thing. I'd heard the gospel so many times, which is good, but I felt like also it kind of got maybe watered down for me to some degree, or I tuned it out every time I hear it because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm already saved. I've already been baptized, but I wasn't really serving God. I wasn't serving Jesus. I wasn't, it just wasn't like a priority for me. And I knew that, I wasn't, when I would drink and smoke, like I knew those weren't things that someone who's a Christian should do. Like I had that moral compass to know what was right and what was wrong. And I remember I would just tell myself, oh, when I get older, I'll get it right. When I get older, I'll make sure me and God are good. When I go to get married or whatever, which is not a good realm of thinking. So
interesting. Wow. I can relate to that because I also have a similar experience that growing up as a kid, you were following your parents to the church, read the Bible, but then your heart was not connected to all of that. At that age of 14 thereabout, a child is looking for adventure, for a level of risk, for something that, really excites you, but at times that is even beyond the emotions and things like that. You are looking for, for something that your heart is really connected to. And at times it might be that, the church experience looks too boring or looks not appealing to a teenager, and also it just makes it look easy peasy and not something that somebody at that age will be interested to want to explore, because there seems to be no level of curiosity that is attached to so many Christian practice and church experience.
It's that rebellious side. I heard it said that like no one had to teach you how to sin. That's part of our nature. We're born into sin. And so no one had to teach you how to do these things. That gratification of the flesh that's almost natural for us. And so, in high school, I wanted that adrenaline. I liked feeling like I was getting away with something or sneaking around. I used to sneak out of my house, all of these. I mean, I'm just thankful I never gave my mom a heart attack, honestly. I'm sure if she was here, she'd say I probably got pretty close a few times.
Wow, I can imagine the pain of a mother. So, Isaiah, when you are at that age of 14 or thereabout, what was it that your heart was actually longing for and searching for that you were able to find in drugs and alcohol and partying?
That's a good question. You're asking some bangers here. Man, I think at the time I didn't realize that I was trying to like fill a hole or fill a void. At that age, I don't think I had the emotional intelligence to recognize that. It was more just like, this is fun. I'm just doing it with my friends. And maybe even at that time, maybe I wasn't even trying to fill a void. But as time goes on and life goes on and life gets hard, that I feel like that void just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it did reach a point, maybe when I was like 18 or 19, where I think I maybe started to realize that I am smoking or drinking or doing different drugs partying, whatever it might be, to numb, to try to numb any bad feelings I had. The one downside, well, I shouldn't say one, there's many downsides to, not having, mother and father together, the dynamic, how it's supposed to be, is, a father is really supposed to teach a young man how to emotionally regulate, especially going through puberty and all this stuff. It's like you have all the like anger and sadness and, lust and all these different things. And if there's no one really there to teach you how to navigate through that, you're just kind of left to your own vices. And, my stepdad, he worked a lot. My mom, she tried her best. My dad, we would see him every other weekend. And so it just wasn't set up the way that it's necessarily supposed to be. And so with that, I never knew how to control my anger. I never knew how to control, when I would get frustrated or sad or, even happy, like I just didn't know how to control those emotions. And so I would like lean on smoking because it would mellow me out, or drinking because it would make me forget, or doing pills because I wouldn't feel anything, whatever it might be. And over time, that void just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the more you keep trying to use things to numb, it gets less and less effective,
Isaiah, there is someone watching this recording now. And the person feels that, well, I'm just having fun. I'm just experimenting and I'm just exploring with all of these vices, drugs, alcohol, and all of that. And say, well, when I'm ready, I will stop. From your experience, what will you tell such a person at this point when it comes to how drugs and alcohol eventually controls you and you're in a place where you're unable to stop or control even when you want to?
I would say sin is fun for a season. It would be a lie to be like it's not fun at all, 'cause nobody would be enticed to it, right?
True.
But sin keeps you longer than you want to stay. It takes you farther than you thought you were going to go, and when I was 14, 15 years old, I remember my mom finding out that I smoked, and, she was in tears, and just wanted me to stop. And I remember telling her, like, Mom, it's just a little weed, like we're just smoking. It's not harming anybody, like I'm not going to go any farther than this. I remember telling her that. I was probably 15 years old. I'm not going to do anything else but this. Yeah. I mean, I think that next year I tried something new. It breaks down your defenses. The Bible tells us in 1 Peter 5:8 to be sober-minded, be watchful, for your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. And so when you aren't being of a sober mind, when you aren't being watchful and aware of your surroundings, all of a sudden new things creep in and you find yourself inching closer and closer to that roaring lion, until you are devoured, which is that point where you lose control. You're no longer in control of, I'll stop when I want to stop. Anytime someone tells me that, I'm like, okay, then just do it. If you can stop whenever you want to. I don't want to. It's like, I don't think it's that you don't want to. I don't think you can, but you got to come to that self-realization yourself. When you're still in that pride, because ultimately that's what it is. It's pride, saying I can do what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it. That is entirely prideful. And when you're still in that, you're never going to admit that you're wrong or be like, oh yeah, I'll just stop. You have to come to this point, sadly, where it's a lot of people's rock bottom, where you hit this point of like, oh man, I've ruined everything. I've caused destruction all around me, and sometimes for some people it's too late, maybe you end up doing something really stupid and now you're in prison, or you're drinking and driving and you killed somebody, like there's some very severe punishments that can sometimes come with that.
So will you say that peer pressure or associating with wrong set of people make it easy for you to go into drugs at that time?
You know, it's funny because I've been asked this, especially by like my mom or other family members, you know, like, did you feel like you were peer pressured? And funny enough, I felt like I was the one that like peer pressured.
Really?
You know, a lot of my friends, we all kind of started, you know, doing some of that stuff like all around the same time. And I don't know what it was. I mean, there were still influences in my life that I could gain that access to smoking and drinking. And if I didn't have that access originally, maybe I wouldn't have, you know, tried to go down that path. But ultimately it was my decision. I was like, you know what? I want to try to smoke weed, you know? Curiosity. That's really, really what it was, you know? I'm not sure why, you know, I guess I just didn't have that fear, you know, that some people have. You know, I know a lot of people, they're just like, I'm just scared of doing it. And not even like a moral thing, just like I'm scared of what might happen if I do it. I sadly did not have that. You know, courage is good if it's used in the right way. That is not a good way to utilize courage.
Isaiah, at what point in life were your parents aware that you started taking drugs?
Well, I would say there's a couple different points. When I was 15, that was the first time like my mom and my stepdad had found out that I was like smoking weed and drinking and stuff like that, just doing things kids shouldn't do. And, you know, my mom tried to ground me and, you know, all these different punishments, and it would work for a little bit, and but then it wouldn't. And but my mom, I think throughout high school, I don't think my mom really knew that I'd been doing anything else except maybe smoking weed. And, you know, I tried my best to hide it from her. You know, she probably knew more times I was high than not. But I think she came to a point where, you know, she knew that she had really no control over the situation, that she had to just trust God. You know, they had rules in their household, like you're not going to have that stuff here. You're not going to do that stuff here. You know, trying to really protect my little sisters. But, you know, I mean, praise the Lord that I'm a transformed man now, because I was very rebellious, very disrespectful, manipulative, you know, a pathological liar. You know, I would lie straight to your face and just, you know, I mean, die on that hill, you know. Then later on in life, you know, I moved out of my parents' house when I was like 19, got my own apartment. And at this point, you know, I'd tried a lot of other stuff, but I was pretty consistent with doing, you know, pills or, you know, like party drugs, psychedelics, you know, bunch of different stuff. And I think my mom maybe knew that I wasn't doing okay, you know, because I would go like stretches of time without really talking to her, which isn't like me. I mean, even now we still talk at least once every couple days, you know, over the phone. But once I really started getting bad in the pills, to the point where it was causing me to like withdraw, and, you know, have these different symptoms, that's when I told my mom originally. And I think I was like 20 at that time. And so then at that point, she kind of started to realize that, okay, like there's a bigger problem at hand.
What are some blind spots that you think parents are not willing to admit to when they hear that their child or their loved one is into drugs? Looking back now, or is there something that parents, you know, when you love someone so much, there is a tendency for you not to admit that they are in error, you know, and but looking back, what would be some of those maybe missing signs or early signs of things that parents were not willing to admit to? And at times, I think that you can speak point to this, that maybe parents feel that people will see them as a failure, and therefore they are not willing to admit to that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on maybe the stage of life your child's in. You know, a kid that's in high school, it's going to be a little bit different because obviously the kid's still living at home with you.
Yeah.
And so you have a little bit more direct access to that kid, to their room, you know, search their belongings, you know, their car, especially if you paid for it. And so you can kind of handle that in a different way. If your kid is grown, or maybe not grown, but like out of the house, right? Like in their 20s or at college or something like that. It can be hard. I know for a lot of parents, you know, there is that embarrassment factor. And I think that does stem from like feeling like that they failed. Because ultimately it's your child, you know, it was up to you to raise them and all of this stuff. And so it can definitely feel like that you had failed at some point or another. And if you aren't mature enough to, you know, navigate through that, a lot of parents end up in denial, you know, and just being like, well, no, that's not, you know, I didn't fail. So they're definitely not struggling. Or they just put it completely on their kid. Well, if they're struggling, that's their problem, you know, whatever. And then you also get parents that sometimes fall more into the enabling category, where they, you know, just continue to enable the behavior, really thinking that they're helping their kid, you know, giving them money when they ask, or, you know, bailing them out of jail, or, you know, just different things like that, which ultimately just enables them to continue in that behavior pattern.
I'm curious about during this phase of when you were between 14 to 21, what were some, what would you refer to as the darkest night, a darkest moment during those period?
There's a couple. There's quite a few. You know, I'm a pretty stubborn person, so God had to humble me quite a few times before I finally listened. The first one that comes to mind, I want to say I was 19 years old, and me and one of my best friends, we were about a month away from moving out. Moving out of my parents' house. He was moving out of his parents' house. We're moving to a different town. And another one of my best friends, you know, he had just recently gone through a breakup. I had recently gone through a breakup. And so me and my buddy that we were going to move out together, we went to go get some pills. You know, we were doing what's called Percocets. Just painkillers, pretty much. Like oxycodone kind of thing. And the guy that we usually would get from, he was like, oh, I don't have any more, but I do have these other ones. Well, the other ones were cut with fentanyl, but we didn't know that at the time. You know, we just thought, oh, you know, there's still pain pills. That's what we want. That's what we came to get. And so we bought them. Took them back to my other buddy's house who was, you know, recently going through a breakup. And, you know, he had been drinking a little bit, which if you know anything about opiates, you never drink and do opiates at the same time. You shouldn't, you know, it's just, it's two downers and has a high chance of leading to overdose. And so, but, you know, we were 19, 20 years old, didn't care. And so we had done these pills that were cut with fentanyl that we were unaware of. My buddy that had been drinking, you know, he had done some. And we were like sitting on the couch and, you know, we were talking. I remember looking at my phone and like it started hitting me and I couldn't even really read my phone. I was like, whoa, like what's, you know, this is way stronger than anything else. And I remember looking at my friend and he was completely blue.
Wow.
Like his whole face was blue. He stopped breathing. And
what?
We're talking in a matter of minutes. Like I was talking to him, having a conversation, looked at my phone, looked back, and he looked like a Smurf. And so I'd never seen someone overdose before, but thankfully I knew exactly what was going on. And so I went up to him, I started shaking him, like slapping his face, trying to get him to wake up. He was not waking up. Threw him on the ground. I remember trying to do CPR, but mind you, I'm also very intoxicated.
Yeah.
And so like I have no strength in my arms. Like I can't even, like I just felt like I had noodle arms, you know, I couldn't do the chest compressions. And even if I could, I don't even know if I would have known how to do it properly. And so thankfully I had the wherewithal to, you know, tell my other friend like, hey, call 911. Like we gotta call 911. And so the ambulance came, they Narcaned him. You know, I think they had to Narcan him twice, did chest compressions. He came back to, praise God.
Wow.
Still alive today. He has an incredible testimony as well. You know, he's turned his life around.
Praise God.
Yeah, praise the Lord. But that was my first instance with fentanyl. And you would think that would have been my last instance, but that was just the start of a very dark next 2 years of my life. So asking like what my darkest night was, man, that's hard, because I mean that night right there really kicked off the next 2 years of like the darkest 2 years of my life. And there were glimpses of hope and throughout there, but that was between 19 and 21. That was a very, very difficult time. And that's kind of, that moment just is kind of like I don't know, it just reminds me of like kind of what had started. That was right before 2021. You know, you would think I would have flushed the pills away, would have never touched them again, but I didn't. I kept them, you know, and I was like, oh, I'll just be safer next time. You know, we won't do as much. We'll do smaller amounts, and, you know, it's just sick. It shows how lost you can get in that sin, you know. It takes you farther than you ever thought you would go.
So Isaiah, when people look at you at that time period of, you know, 17, 18, 19 years old, and you begin to explore all of these things, you know, you are very active. What is it that people around you missed? Or what is it that people did not notice about you, but that you were crying deep within that somebody will see you, notice, and pay attention?
I think I was pretty good at hiding it, at least in small talk or in passing, or maybe just on social media. You know, I mean, I don't think by any means I looked like I had it all put together, but I don't think most people knew that I was struggling to the level of which I was at that time. You know, there were people who were very close to me, people that I worked with, that didn't even really know until closer to when I like finally got the help that I really needed. You know, those 6 months leading up to that, I think most people who were close enough to me definitely probably knew at that point, because it was past the point of really being able to hide well, you know. But I think when most people looked at me, they probably just looked at, you know, just a young kid just working. You know, I worked as a server at Logan's Roadhouse, you know, just making money, living in an apartment. You know, they probably saw someone that maybe partied a little bit, you know, stuff like that, would drink on the weekends, you know, smoke weed, which, you know, isn't harmless, but comparatively to what was actually going on, was definitely a lot more mild.
I'd say. So during that phase of life, Isaiah, can you describe or share the lies that you believed about yourself, and also who were you trying to impress or to perform to please at that point in time?
I don't necessarily think I was trying to impress anyone. I think maybe I was trying to, you know, prove myself worthy, which is like a weird sentence to say, because it's like, how are you going to prove yourself worthy doing pills, you know? But like I said, I so much of my identity growing up was wrapped in sports and then in friends. You know, when I was a junior in high school, I had a girlfriend, my first girlfriend, you know, and so my identity was wrapped up with her. And then in partying, my identity was wrapped up in partying. And so moving into out of high school, you know, I went to college for a year. I did track and field. But then 2020 happened, COVID happened, everything got shut down. There was no more track, there was no more school. Everything got moved to online, everybody got sent home. And so, my identity in sports, is now nowhere to be found, really. Not long after that, me and, my high school girlfriend, I think we were dating 3 years at that time, we had broken up. And so now my identity that was wrapped up in her is now gone. A lot of my friends, when you graduate high school, you lose a lot of friends, right? People go to different colleges, you just don't remain as close. And so, between, me and my ex breaking up, and then, just that, I lost a lot of friends during that time. And so all I was really left with was just this like identity of partying. And so I think I found my only worth in, doing drugs, selling drugs, being that guy that people could go to, for where's the next party at? Where's the move, stuff like that. I think that's the only way I really felt any kind of like importance in my life, because outside of that, I was just working as a server, in a restaurant. That's not really a career.
So that gave you meaning and purpose?
In a sick, twisted kind of way. Yeah. Yes, I would say so. But it didn't last, it's just a dead end. Yeah. There's no growing past that, all it leads to is either prison or death ultimately. And I knew that. And we talk about my darkest times. I mean, my many darkest nights that I had were me not wanting to live anymore, because I was just like, that's where I'm heading towards anyways. I didn't think I was going to live to see 21 for a while. And then I did live to see 21, but I didn't think I was going to live to see that next year. 21 was when I turned 21, that was probably when I was close to the height of my addiction. And I was pretty confident that I was not going to make it to the next birthday, And so here I am, 24.
Wow. Praise God. Praise God. So at that time when you think you will not see your next birthday, what was going through your mind at that time?
Well, I was, really addicted to these fentanyl pills. At that point, I'd already been to rehab once, and I had relapsed. I went to rehab like that year before when I was 20. And I'd relapsed a few months before I turned 21. And it was way worse than it was before. When I went to rehab the first time, I was maybe doing like 1 or 2 pills a day, which is, with fentanyl, it's still a lot, but now, creeping up on my 21st birthday, I think I was doing like 3 or 4 pills a day. And then over the next 6 months, it grew up to like 10 a day, which is just, that's not doable. You can't, I was working and all my money that I made was going straight to pills.
Wow.
Because I couldn't function without them. It got to a point where I wasn't even really getting high. I was just maintaining. It was just like, that's how I could go through my normal day, is using these pills. So it was no way that anybody really wants to live. Even when you're in that, you don't want to live like that. And I really thought like, well, I'm not getting out of this. The only way is through death, And there was times that I tried, I would try to do a bigger amount than what I normally would do, to just try to like, kind of suicide by overdose. But I'd always wake up the next morning, or a few hours after that, I'd pass out for a while, wake up somewhere random in my apartment, and it never really worked. And it's, I'm glad it didn't work. I'm very thankful.
Yeah.
It didn't work. And, it's crazy looking back on it now. Like I knew the only way out was death. And ultimately that is what happened. I came to know Christ, and that old person did die.
Definitely.
And the new has come. And so it's crazy how full circle that is.
Interesting. If we may stay a little bit on that, was there a moment during those periods that you started to hate yourself and having a sense of shame?
Yeah, for sure. There was, especially there towards the end, like I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. Like I go to the bathroom and because I didn't recognize myself.
Really?
I was just like, I don't, because no one in my family had ever, I mean, sure, yeah, some people drink and stuff like that, but there was no real alcoholism in my family, no real drug abuse in my family. I was kind of like this black sheep. And so there was a lot of shame and guilt, and I was in high school. Yes, I was doing stuff that I shouldn't have been doing, but I was like this promising athlete. I was smart. I went to college. When I went to college, I was doing track and field. I was studying computer science. From the outside looking in, it's like, oh, he's got it made. He's got a promising future ahead of him. And within a matter of 2 years, now I'm this junkie working at a restaurant that can't go more than 4 hours without doing a pill, Wow. So I hated who I'd become. I hated myself. I felt like I was just a burden to my family, just like a disgrace, really. And so, yeah, I'd go to the bathroom and I'd literally like just shield my face. I couldn't look at myself.
I will imagine that during those periods, you will be thinking that the world will be better without you. Mm-hmm. And you could not even help yourself.
Right.
And so the next thought in your mind was to take your life.
I would say yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I would try to do enough drugs where I wouldn't wake up. But no, in the sense that like I wasn't going to resort to, hanging myself or shooting myself or jumping off a building. Like I didn't have the courage, I guess you could say, not that that's even a courageous thing, but like I didn't have it in me to take it that far. But it was like if I could just overdose, just do too much where I pretty much, die in my sleep. Which, I mean, it's really dying by suffocation because really what an overdose is your brain just gets so numb that it forgets to tell itself to breathe, forgets to tell your body to breathe, and then you just kind of stop breathing, which is, not a good way to go. But, I was, I guess, content with like going out like that. But I don't know if it was my tolerance was too high or, I think it was just the Holy Spirit, God wasn't done with me yet. He wasn't my time was not yet.
Thanks for staying with us. Please press the subscribe button and also press the notification button to be notified when we release another powerful, transformative story. And let's continue the voyage, the trials, the transition, and hopefully the triumph.